Welcome to another Coffee with Developers. I'm here with Thomas Steiner from Google, a PhD, so I feel stupid already next talking to you, so that's going to be interesting. You had a history of like doing great web stuff. You worked on the Fugu project, and I still think you do. But what I want to talk today about is what's happening in the web AI space. Google just announced a fund for that, which means that people who want to actually build things with AI on the web are actually getting funding for their projects through that fund. Can you tell us a bit more what you're looking for or what this fund is looking for, and what are the things that people can play with already in a web AI space? What is the difference between web AI and AI on the server?
Oh, okay, let me start with the last part maybe. So what we say is web AI is anything that runs on the web. Essentially, there's two ways you can run AI on the web on your own device, which means everything is running locally. So you can download a model or have a browser model that you talk with that is already built into your browser, or you can run everything in the cloud, or there's also like a third way where you can run stuff as a hybrid mode. So some things on device, some things in the cloud. And with the AI fund that we recently announced, the idea is we want to spur innovation in the community, in the ecosystem. There's a whole lot of people who do very interesting stuff. There's everything from indie developers to universities to, just industry who contribute stuff to, small single-person developers who just work on something and could use some funding to help their project take off. And essentially, we want to, independent from what people do, we want to help them, realize their use cases on the web with AI. And that's where the fund comes in. It's on Open Collective, so people can transparently see what are the projects that get funding. You can apply. You can just motivate why do you need funding, what is the reason for asking for funding. Obviously, if you're an independent developer, that's kind of different than when you are with a big corporation that already has a lot of money. But like in the end, we want to help interesting projects to take off and get more horsepower behind the development and just spur innovation in the ecosystem.
The interesting thing is that in the past, we realized that it's like when it comes to LLMs, it's huge sets of data, and it costs a lot of money. And now we're actually in a space with DeepSeek, where we're actually seeing that there is a different way to train the system in itself as well. So the data that has to be shifted around or indexed every single time is getting smaller and smaller. And people are also using smaller models on their own machines. Now, the thing, though, is like when it comes to like running things locally or running things for our end users locally, that would mean tons of downloads, isn't it? Like a model to download to run in the browser would mean that you actually have to download a few megabytes for every single time you do it. Do you think that's, is there a way around that? Or is this something that people will get used to in the future?
So I think what we need people to do is just like with resources on the web, you look at an image, and if you deliver an image that is 2,000 pixels wide, but you display it at 1,000 pixels only, then maybe you're doing something wrong. So there's, of course, 2x displays and stuff, but you get the point. So sometimes you just use something that is too big and you display something way too small. I think something similar can happen with models. The temptation is, of course, let's get the biggest and best model and download hundreds of megabytes. But in many cases, a smaller model will do the job just as well. So especially also when it comes to the device that you have to deal with. So imagine you have a video conferencing software and you need a model that does background blurring on a mobile device. Already by definition, typically the screen is smaller than on a desktop device. So even if you have a model that is very powerful, that can up to the smallest detail remove every single hair from the foreground versus the background, you won't see it on a mobile device. So on a mobile device, you can typically get away with a smaller model for this particular use case. And then also, depending on how powerful your device is, you can also even dynamically work with different models, work with different parameters of that model, make the calculation more or less involved. So yeah, I think that's one part of the answer. So just using the smallest possible model that still delivers acceptable quality. But then also in the end, we came to realize a lot of the use cases that people have on the web are repeated. So people typically want some sort of summarization. People want something that helps them write. People want to reformulate something that they've already written. And for those use cases, one idea we had on the Chrome team was to have built-in models. So essentially, we have one model, Gemini Nano, currently that we ship with Chrome, or dynamically ship once it's requested for the first time. But the idea then is that all the other origins that you have, or on your, that you make use of on your applications, that all those models, that all those applications can use the same one, so that you only pay the download cost once. The browser would even take care of the download per se, so there's nothing like you're having to deal with interrupted downloads or downloads that just take ages and get corrupted or something. So the browser would do all this downloading stuff for you, and then as a user, as a developer, you could essentially just use very high-level APIs. So summarize, for example, to then summarize a text without having to deal with what are the parameters of the model, what are the, I don't know, the temperature and top K and all those things that you can tweak with LLMs typically. This would be something that already is taken care of by the higher level API for you. So that's one way of addressing this problem that you mentioned. And then, yeah, I just think in general, there's also an interesting spot for applications, to maybe, just look at what are the common use cases that people want to realize, and then seeing if maybe even the platform itself could have this feature built in. So if you look at background blurring, that's an example that I came up with before. There's an attempt, for example, by Intel, and you mentioned Project Fugu in the introduction, to just make use of what the camera on the system typically already ships with, and just expose this to the web. So that you could say, get user media, and then one of the constraints of the media stream that you get is the feature that it can be blurred automatically. So you would be dealing with something that is somewhere in the system taking care of the blurring, but as a web developer, it would just be a feature that you enable. So just looking at all those use cases, is there something that is just common enough that it could be exposed as a web platform feature? So I think there's the whole range of what people do. And then of course there's the extreme edge where we have people like WebLLM or Transformers.js that work with models that they download, that they cache locally, and then expose the features in their applications. And of course, this is then where we come with hundreds of megabytes, sometimes even gigabytes for some of those demos that you may have seen, like Stable Diffusion or all the WebLLM stuff that lets you talk to, I don't know, the Llama models, for example, or the JAMA open source models. So I think that's a very different range of features. And in the end, I think it's mostly around, as a web community, recognizing what are the features that we actually can abstract far enough so that we can expose them as high level, and what are the features that really set applications apart. So when there is something that is, I don't know, a very unique image filtering software that is something that is proprietary to a particular app, and of course, there's no way that this could ever make it into a browser or even an operating system. It would just have to be delivered as a model that people download.
I love that it says progressive enhancement in the iteration, in the explanation of the fund as well, that this is something that we're looking forward to, that basically where can we put AI into it? I think that's something that I've been always trying to follow. And as far as I understand it, the simplest bit is to actually test for navigator.ai in the browser. And that's basically when you get the model. So we have to think about what APIs will we have. And I guess this fund is also part of the research on that, what developers really need and how we can actually standardize that in the future. So what's the cross-browser story here? I've seen a few libraries on GitHub that says like, okay, if the browser can do it on a Mac Silicon machine, and if it can do it on Safari, if it can do it on Chrome. Right now, I guess it's Chrome only, most of it, what I've seen. But is there ways to I guess it's going to be hard to actually do an in-between API. But is this something that we think about in the future will run out to all browsers, or is this a game where Chrome wants to shine compared to other browsers?
So we've seen the community react in very different ways. So there's progressive enhancement in a sense where people have the built-in API in Chrome, and then they polyfill that particular interface and fill it with other cloud implementations, for example. So if the browser has it, you can use it. If it doesn't have it, you use something in the cloud. Of course, it's kind of the devil is in the details with these kind of things. So if the promise of the application is, hey, we process everything on device, but then all of a sudden you have this polyfill that then calls cloud APIs, it's a different kind of story, obviously. So the privacy policies of such applications definitely need to take this into account. We've seen the other approach where people rely on something like a very established API, like the OpenAI kind of APIs, and shoehorn essentially the built-in APIs into this user interface. So it goes the other way around. We are also thinking of having some sort of hybrid AI where there would be some sort of switch for the developer where you could say, if the browser has it, then use the API, else use some sort of hybrid API that would be fed by some cloud logic that Google would provide somewhere in the cloud. So I think there's thinking in this directions. There's also browser vendors like Edge who are interested in the prompt API in particular. We talked to Firefox, we talked to Safari as well. And I think when we look at the entire range of these APIs, there's very clearly defined APIs like the translation API. And if you look at Firefox, for example, Firefox already has on-device translation using models. So for them, exposing this feature to the web would be, I think, relatively non-controversial. So that's something that they would probably be relatively happy to do. Translation is also a very established use case. So there's, of course, different models that can do the translation, but there's generally agreed on quality standards that you can benchmark your models against and say, yeah, we're Firefox. We may not have the big funding of, let's say, Google, so we can work with other models than Google does. And you can then just check with the benchmarks, is the quality good enough? And I think browsers can get really far there. And then there's what we call the explorative, that's how to say, experimental APIs, where with the prompt API, we look at, yeah, what is it that people do with a free-form LLM that they can talk to? And in many cases, we realize actually there's repeating use cases. So people want to, for example, from a review, want to translate a review in a 5-star rating. So that's something that people commonly do. Or people give the LLM some text and say, can you show me all the mistakes in there? Can you show me the grammar mistakes? Can you make the grammar better, for example? So these kind of things. So this hints at the need for actually some sort of proofreading API. So our thinking right now is we have the prompt API as an experiment where people can just freeform play with the model. And if you realize there's a lot of repeated use cases, then there might be some opportunity for the standardization people to come up with, can we take this use case and standardize it?
One thing that is tricky in the AI space is there seems to be a rift between Europe and America. Like a lot of times APIs and access to things become much later available in Europe because of regulations. Is this something that works in this space as well? Or is this something as it's a developer access, it's a different story? So basically, does that fund actually support anybody in the world? Or is it basically you can get the funding, but you can't get access to the data because you're in Europe?
So I think there's regions on the world that are excluded. So I don't know, some countries that are just on a non-American compatible list. I don't want to name any particular names, but like, you know what I mean? So these countries, I think, are excluded. But then when you look at Europe, I can speak for the built-in APIs because those are, the ones that I know the most about. They work by, like right now at least, they work by setting a developer flag that everybody can set locally on the browser. There's some of them that have advanced to the next stage, which is origin trial. And yeah, as long as people participate with the applications in the origin trial, the APIs get opened to anyone who uses the particular website. When it comes to cloud APIs, I think it's a different story. There's some, as you say, regulation in Europe that cause cloud operators to be a little bit more conservative with releasing access to those APIs. I can't really speak to cloud because it's an entirely different organization, so I don't want to say anything that is wrong. But for the built-in ones, if you just want to play with it and just see what's going on, you can just toggle a flag in your Chrome browser and just see what happens locally.
Yeah, that was a thing that, like, when we took the we had our web dev and AI day a few in December, and Raymond Camden showed a lot of demos, and I pushed him for like doing client side stuff as well, and most of it was just like, oh, I need that nightly build, I need to turn on the developer flag. So is this something that is basically reliant on the outcome of some of the things that you do right now, or what's the timeline until these things will be available just in Chrome when I install it, rather than having to do a developer preview? Because that was always the issue as well. Like, I mean, can do progressive enhancement, but I cannot ask my users to actually use a nightly build.
Yeah, so when you go to the GitHub repository of the Web Machine Learning Working Group in the W3C, you will discover there's a bunch of APIs that have landed in this particular working group's charter. So we work we work on standardizing those APIs so that ideally it becomes something that other browser vendors will implement, and in the end just expose as a regular web API. But the path to something being an idea and then becoming a full standard is pretty long. So for the time being, those APIs start as local experiments that you can test on your own browser, and then advance, in the case of Chrome, to the next level, which is origin trial, where interested parties can say, my application on example.com makes use of this particular API, so I expose on example.com as part of my source code or as part of an HTTP header a Chrome origin trial token that then tells the browser, for everyone who uses example.com, enable those APIs. And then finally, once we hit the shipping stage in Chrome, we will just make them globally available on all Chrome installs. But yeah, then of course, other browser vendors have different processes, but for Chrome, that's the process that we follow.
Cool. So I mean, the good thing is it is not as long as it used to be. It used to be like years, and now it's kind of months that we go from one space to another. And I mean, the origin trial is much easier than like having to set flags every time you start it. And I love that it's an HTTP header as well. One thing that I'm worried about, and as a former browser maker developer as well, is the UX of it. Like, as a web developer, I always build an interface. So I actually want to make sure that people, when I build a background remover, I want to have a good interface for that. But at the same time, I see every browser maker and every AI provider shoving AI in my face right now. Like, I mean, it started in Edge with like the Copilot button, and now Google Gemini opened the floodgates the last few days. Now Gmail asks me if it wants me to write apps for them. So summaries for my emails. So how can we actually prevent, as developers, that our solutions will not have to compete with the inbuilt solutions of the browser UX in this space? Because I can see more and more that happening, of like little sparkly icons being automatically shown in the browser rather than me having that interface as a developer to the end user.
Yeah, so we had a built-in AI challenge recently, and a lot of the things that people built were actually extensions that, from an extension context, made use of certain AI APIs that then, for example, on news sites, blurred everything that is about the recent US elections, as an example. So that's a classic extension use case. And you could imagine very well that browser makers would get inspiration from some of those extensions and just build them natively into their user interface. So it started with ad blockers. So a lot of browsers now have built-in ad blockers that used to be extensions. And I think when it comes to AI, obviously AI right now is a selling point. So Edge brands itself as the AI browser. There's Arc, there's the new browser that the browser company is building that is entirely themed around AI. So AI is definitely becoming something that is a selling point. Most end users, they don't really think about AI. They have a vague understanding of what AI is. And I think for those users, if something is AI or if something in the end works with, I don't know, a complex set of regular expressions, whatever, it doesn't matter. As long as the feature is there for users, that's the core thing to happen. So I would say we currently have a tendency to kind of brand everything as AI that makes even the slightest use of AI, because that's something that the community right now is hopping onto, and there's funding obviously for everything that is involving some sort of AI. But I think this will slowly normalize. So people will just use it as a technology without really mentioning that it's AI anymore. So something similar happened a bit with progressive web apps. So people build progressive web apps and you just don't mention it anymore so much. So it has just become the default in many cases that people build an application that can be installed, that has certain features, that is behaving in an app-like way. So I think, yeah, if you go one step further even, so people don't mention Ajax applications anymore, right? So people just, use XML HTTP request, or not even that, they use fetch. And it is not even worth mentioning anymore that there is some sort of magic happening where you don't require a full reload. So I think something like AI as well, where people just make use of the features if it's implemented with AI or not. As long as the feature makes sense, people will use it, and I think this is where we get to. And of course, yeah, there will be some sort of in-between stage where the browser tries to give you something, but at the same time, an extension that the user has installed gives you something, and then maybe even the operating system may want to correct your text that you type in an email, and then the email application itself, and then maybe an extension. So there might be some fighting for who is the actual provider of the service. But I think in the end, we will sort of converge to some sort of, this is just the thing that gets done. It doesn't really matter that much how it happens and through what particular lever.
It will be an interesting research because I can see race conditions. I can see, for example, I would say, okay, I have a text box and I want to progressively enhance it with AI to allow for code for text generation or text. Basically, I type something and it auto completes to something else using an LLM that is actually focused on a certain topic. But the browser will probably have a sparkly icon saying like, oh, that's a text box. I want to do that there as well. So I was wondering if there is a chance of me as a developer, if I do if navigator.ai, that I could turn these things off, that they actually don't interfere with me. We had that in the past. I think one of my most clicked blog posts between 2005 2007 was when Google had the Google toolbar, and that you could install an Internet Explorer, and it would actually, when it had content that it shared, that it stored for you for these form fields, it would paint them yellow. So people were just like, why is the background yellow and why can't I override it in CSS? And I can see a lot of these UX things happening in the nearer future and already right now in some browsers. Like Microsoft has this, every image that I roll over, it has this little icon that actually do a visual search with it. And people were like, where does this icon come from? Can I override it? So it would be interesting to use this this fund and also the general idea of researching that. What can I do as a developer to prevent from I mean, we can do a prevent default on form submission. We can do a prevent default on like video play. So it will be interesting to do these auto completion tasks and the AI tasks that we do to input fields if I could stop them from happening.
Yeah, I think this is happening today already. If you look at password managers that always fight with the browser's own autocomplete, the response so far has been either turning autocomplete off, which is not great for a user. There's a lot of banks who draw fake input fields and make it even worse. Some banks even block you from pasting stuff into the password field and this kind of things. So yes, there's a lot of research that is required to make this behave well, play well with each other. I think in the Microsoft Edge Explainer, there is Explainer's GitHub repository. I think there's someone who proposed an attribute that is fighting the automation, the automatic rewriting, I think. I'm not fully sure on the details here, but I have something vaguely in my back. People just propose, let's have an attribute where you can just, as a developer, say, this is something that I don't want the browser to interfere with because it's, I don't know, you are providing some sort of class app. Of course, it would be bad if ChatGPT plugins wrote your essay that you have to deliver as a student and not the student themselves. So this kind of things. But of course, yeah, it's like there will be developers who try to overcome this and remove the if there's an attribute, remove the attribute programmatically and stuff. So I think it's not new as a challenge because we've seen it already. You mentioned it with like back to the Google toolbar days. I also remember that. But then, yeah, password managers, anything that is having to do with pasting OTPs and stuff. So there's rough edges. We as a community, I think, need to see how we can solve those problems. And I think the web is a bit unique there because the web is hackable by default. So with native applications, you typically can't install some extension to your operating system that would, I don't know, mess with any kind of input field. Unless, like, if you think of the old jailbreak iPhone days, there were some system level things that tried this, but like regular users can't. But for us as web users, getting some extension that messes with every single web page is just a click to the Chrome Web Store, Edge Web Store, whatever, the Firefox add-on store away, and there you have it. All of a sudden, your entire web browsing experience can be hacked by something that the developer of those applications can't even detect. So they have some very weird error messages maybe, and it takes a lot of debugging until finally someone realizes, oh, this is because of whatever, this great monkey script that someone wrote, and it just auto executes on every single web page. So I think, yes, this is not a new problem, but a very worthwhile problem to solve.
Safari even has this script that runs before the page is rendered, which I never knew of before. It was just basically you can write a JavaScript that does things before the browser even requests the HTML. I didn't know that was the thing, but it's interesting. It's interesting though as well. Like I mean, as a developer, as a browser maker, I loved and hated extensions. I loved extensions for finding functionality that people need and allowing people to hack the product that they do, but it also interfered with the performance and it interfered with the memory consumption. And basically every time people complained about the browser, it was probably because they had 5,000 extensions running, 5 of them being YouTube downloader extensions that are also using malware and do like Bitcoin mining in the background. So there was a bit of a controversy in the last month about like Chrome disallowing the old model of extensions and actually limiting the power of extensions. What's the story there? Is this still has this? I mean, I haven't followed it much myself. Has this abated a bit, or is it still like the big thing that people says like, oh, Google hates ad blockers and they're actually stopping you from writing proper extensions?
I don't want to give you an answer that one of my colleagues can give you a lot better, because we have someone who works in extension developer relations, and actually a team of 3. And I would just invite them to the show and ask them everything about extensions and Manifest v3. One thing that I will say is Chrome doesn't hate ad blockers. So actually, there's the ad blocker summit, and we sent, I think, the entire extensions DevRel team to that ad blocker summit. I made sure that they get to talk to the community who builds ad blockers, because that's a very important use case. The top downloaded extensions on the Chrome Web Store typically are ad blockers, and we don't hate them. We want them to operate as well as they can and get the things that they want to. Google Ads typically are the easiest to block, actually. So invite them, invite any of them. I will provide you with the names so you can get them on the show and ask them. But that's what I want to say about this.
It also feels like solving the wrong problem. Like basically, like by blocking the ads, you just make sure that ads become more aggressive, and people want to make money somehow. And somehow the stuff that you see for free on the internet has to be paid for. So I always found the clever way out to just block things a danger to the web. And there was this great article about somebody who came up with a pop-up ad, calling it the original sin of the web, that basically the advertising is the only way to monetize it is the problem, not the technical implications of it or the implementations of it. So but I'm really excited about this. There's lots of good stuff happening. I mean, I will point to the link, and we will talk more about this in the near future. I just wanted to know what the current state is. And in terms of one last thing that I'm wondering about now is that we already have and I was part of that working group that had like AI on device on the OS level, on the Windows level with Onyx models, and on the Mac OS level with their own. There was a big standardization fight there. So a lot of stuff can happen on their own machine. So I could download Olama and run it in the background. I do that with Whisper AI, for example, to create transcripts of videos now rather than having to upload them somewhere. Is there any way that from the browser I could access a local model on my OS, or is this a security level that I shouldn't breach? Because I don't want to repeat that. I don't want to download another model in my browser when I already have it somewhere on device, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of multimodal use cases that obviously we have heard. So people want to transcribe videos, people want to transcribe maybe this podcast episode because they don't want to listen to the whole thing, but just have a written summary of what we said. So we heard those use cases, and Gemini Nano is a model that is multimodal capable. There's a big developer conference coming up pretty soon, so watch this space in the Google area. But then, of course, there's also people who build extensions that allow you to connect to a local web server where you can expose models that you have installed on your machine and get access to those. There's Firefox who have worked with Hugging Face to make access to allow access to models that you download at the extension level and then expose them to every single extension that wants to use those without having repeated downloads. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening where people just think of, hey, this is actually something that can be a shared resource. I don't want to download it repeatedly. Exposing things at the OS level is, of course, yet another story. But thinking of mobile, that's probably something that will be something that people will look into. So on Android, on premium models, at least for the Pixel phones, we ship Gemini Nano already. So there would be, of course, it would make no sense for if Chrome were to expose Gemini Nano to ship yet another Gemini Nano within Chrome if the operating system already has one. On Mac and Windows, when you download Chrome, it's different. There we would download the Gemini Nano model separately. There's Apple devices who have entirely different logic of how to run AI. There's I forgot how they call it, but they run some tasks that the local device is not capable enough of. They run those in the cloud, but in an anonymous way. So I think there's a lot of innovation also for doing things in a hybrid way where you can process locally if you can't run it privately somewhere in a big data center and deliver the results back. So I think it's early days, but it's very exciting days where people just play with different ways of dealing with particular AI models. I wrote an article where you can get access to a local model that you download on your hard disk through the File System Access API. So that's also something that, of course, is pretty hacky. So you would do that if you're a researcher, maybe, but I wouldn't expect regular users to go through a file open dialog and somewhere on their hard disk find a model file that they've downloaded. So I think there's a full range also of what people want to do on the web and what actual regular users will end up doing on the web with AI.
Excellent. I mean, I didn't think of just running a web server and having it as a local API call. That could be even a pseudo protocol. Like there's just interesting things we could do it that way. Like if you have a certain port where you can point to your model, that will be one way of doing it. Okay, so I'm ready to hack. I hope you out there are ready to hack about these things as well. There's funding, but it doesn't need to be funding. It's great that we already have these capabilities. And I love that it has an approach of the web with progressive enhancement in mind. So with that, I thank you very much, Thomas Steiner from Google. And I hope to hear from you soon and see some more details about that. And I'm going to look forward to that upcoming developer conference as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.